And we're continuing our conversation this morning about the spirituality of Jesus on this fifth Sunday of Lent. And I'm excited about for this conversation because I think today we are taking on what, in my mind, is the most powerful spiritual metaphor for for the life that we are called to live, and for Jesus' own spirituality, which is captured in the Gospel of John in Jesus' farewell discourse, and that is the image of the vine and the branches. So I want to begin this morning. When I think back in my childhood, we lived in a house in a big woods, and there were tons of vines around our house. And my dad hated them because when he would try to mow, they would be all over the place, and he would cut some of them and try to remove some of them, and they would always come back and created such a tangle. And so I can remember I hear his voice in the back of my mind this morning complaining about the tangle of the vines. And I also know that sometimes when he would cut one, we would grab it on the hill, which was where the house was, and the hill sloped down pretty sharply to a creek that ran through the property. And we would get on those vines and swing out over the creek and then come back, and then we would do it again. And so I'm thinking of all the emotion that's captured in that. My dad complaining about the vines because they were so tangled and created difficulty for him, and also us kids just having a ball with the vines. And I think all of those emotions are captured in that image this morning. And some of you, as I talk about this, I know you're gardeners and you have ideas about vines in your own yard. You've probably experienced the tangle, and you've also probably experienced the blooming. Some of the vines can just bloom in beautiful ways. And I love the way Lori's captured that on her altar this morning, the beauty of the blooming and the tangle of the vines. So I want you to bring those experiences with you this morning because I think they're all important. So let's start with a word from Sojourner's Hub. This is a teaching sketch about the vine and the branches. It says that vines can be decorative, beautiful, fruit-bearing, nuisances, and or poisonous. The types of vines we have around can make a great deal of difference in our environment. Now, hold on to that. Some vines grow only along the ground, while others climb on rocks, buildings, and trees. These are the vines that attach themselves to something stable and enduring. The word Jesus used in John 15 was of a vine that in the Greek meant as coiling about a support. Now, that is the word ampeos. Coiling about a support. How are your supports this morning? What is Jesus using as his support here? Health, or was I? Okay. We'll go ahead. Here it is. The word Jesus used in John 15 was of a vine that in Greek meant as coiling about a support. Okay. So vines can be poisonous, they can be beautiful, they can be fruit bearing. They are a tangle oftentimes that if you're a gardener and you're taking care of things has to be cared for. So what in the world does all that have to do with the spiritual life so much that Jesus would say, I am the true vine, and my divine parent is the vine grower. Now, people who were listening to Jesus would have been familiar with vines, and they would have understood the complexity of this metaphor. Many of them would have understood pruning and gardening where you have to prune the vines back for the grapes to grow. Are any of us being pruned this morning in our spiritual lives? Or maybe we need to undertake some pruning in our spiritual lives. Sometimes we get pruned not by our own intentions, and sometimes we get pruned intentionally by doing spiritual practice and by asking the Holy Spirit into our lives to transform us and to change us and to cause us to bear fruit. This image of fruit is so powerful and shows up a lot in Jesus' discourses, and also shows up when Paul talks about the fruit of the Spirit, things like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, self control, those kinds of things, fruit of the Spirit. So I ask you this morning, what kind of fruit are you bearing in your life? I saw a bumper sticker this week that said xenophobia is not a fruit of the Spirit. And I think that's absolutely true. And we need to be careful about the fruit we are putting out into the world because some of it is poisonous. And other fruit is fruitful and tasty and beautiful and blooming. And so we need to keep an eye on that. So that's one reason the vine and branches is an interesting metaphor. So Jesus goes on and says, those who abide in me, he uses this word abide throughout this discourse. And I want you to pay attention to that word because the Greek word abide really, meno, really means to set up housekeeping in, abide, to live in, to be there, to be present, there's really a sense of connection and cohesion. And he says, those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. So, do you hear he's illustrating the importance of that spiritual connection, of being rooted in the vine? This is not a spirituality of independence that he's preaching about. It is not a spirituality of rugged individualism, which is one of the primary tenets of Christian nationalism in our country. And you know, individualism can be a good thing. It can cause self-reliance and allow you to volunteer, to cooperate in things. And in Christian nationalism, they would call for a limited government and all that kind of things. That sounds a little bit good on the surface, but I want you to hear that's at its best. Now, at its worst, it sounds more like this. It's a myth that ignores systemic inequity and promotes isolating selfish behavior. We seeing any of that these days, online and otherwise? Jesus is calling us to something different. He's calling us to be rooted in community and in connection with one another. Nadia Bolz-Weber struggles with this idea of independence. She says, I'm nothing if not independent. Reportedly, my first sentence was, do it self. Yes, I will do it myself. Thank you. See, I want choices. I want independence. What I wish Jesus said is, I am whatever you want me to be, and you can be whatever you want to be. Vine, pruner, branch, soil, knock yourself out. What Jesus actually says is, I am the vine, and my Father is the vine grower. You are the branches. Dang, that casting has already been finalized. Vines and branches off of vines are all tangled and messy, and it's just too hard to know what is what. Not only are we dependent on Jesus, but our lives are uncomfortably tangled up together. Do you hear the calling in this for the beloved community to be rooted in the spiritual, in the vine of Jesus Christ, who he's saying here, I am the vine. So the call is to be rooted in him and in his spirituality. Anytime we're talking about Jesus' spirituality, we're also talking about the spirituality that we are called to cultivate and to prune and to grow in ourselves. And it's a community oriented spirituality, which is one of the central powerful things about this passage. Now, Jesus takes it even further. He says, as the divine parent has loved me, so I have loved you. Now, here's that word abide again. Abide in my love. Not just like root yourself in and, connect with the vine and that sort of thing, but abide, in my love. He says repeatedly, keep my commandments. And then he tells us this is one of those times we get the little plane with the sign out in the back. He says, follow my commandments, and then he tells us what the commandment is, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down his life for one's friends. You are my friends, so do what I have commanded you. And what he's commanded us is to love one another. And in order to love one another, we have to be willing to be rooted in and deeply engaged with this vine system of community that we find ourselves in. I think this morning it's important to note that the forest ecosystem that vines grow in, and these are the kinds of vines that I was talking about at the beginning that, are wrapped all around trees and stuck in the ground and caused my dad heartache when he tried to mow. But I want you to think about this because Peter Wohlleben has written a wonderful book called The Hidden Lives of Trees. And in it, he talks about the forest ecosystem and the way it works. And I want you to listen to what he says because I think this is going to flesh out why Jesus used this metaphor. The most astonishing thing about trees is how social they are. The trees in the forest care for each other, sometimes even going so far as to nourish a stump of a felled tree for centuries after it was cut down by feeding it sugars and other nutrients and keeping it alive. A tree's most important means of staying connected to other trees is something he calls the wood wide web of soil fungus that connects vegetation in an intimate network that allows the sharing of an enormous amount of information and goods. Do you hear any rugged individualism in here? I don't either. Scientific research aimed at understanding the astonishing abilities of this partnership between fungus and plant has only begun. The reason trees share food and communicate is that they need each other. It takes a forest to create a microclimate suitable for tree growth and sustenance, so it's not surprising that isolated trees have far shorter lives than those connected together in forests. An intimate network. Do you hear that? The vines, the trees, the plants, the grass, the animals, us in them, are an intimate network, which is one reason we really need to be paying attention to how the climate is changing and how the earth is heating up, because we are all interconnected and entangled in this beautiful mess that we find ourselves in. And so this morning, I want to have conversation with you about this because I know some of you are gardeners and you have experiences with vines that are going to be relevant to this conversation. And I want to invite you this morning into thinking about how you are connected in the tangle. What's your experience with vines? Why do you think Jesus used this vine and branches metaphor to illustrate who he is and what his and our spiritual lives should look like? How are our spiritual lives tangled and messy? And how are they also beautiful at the same time? Finish the sermon with me. Let's talk. Amen.